Well, nice to meet you, Joe.
Yeah,
Good
nice
to
to
meet
meet
you.
you. Thank you for
Yeah,
taking a minute out today. And I would love to begin our conversation before we get into your life's work by asking 4 years ago in April, we were wrapping our head around this global pandemic.
uh-huh.
How did you survive that COVID time and how did it change you?
Well, given the nature of the work that I do, I viewed the global pandemic as a profound opportunity to go inward, right? And that's where our intuition lives, is on the inside. So for me, it was sort of this, I mean, I perceived it as a profound gift because it forced us to really turn to our inner resources to be able to navigate something we've never navigated before,
Yeah,
right? It there was no map for that,
yeah,
right? And when there is no map, when there is no data, when there is nobody who's already set a path, we have to be able to do those things for ourselves. Again, that's the gift of intuition. So um, I used it to refine those skills for me. I used it to really learn to listen to myself. I used it to be able to discern what was truth and what was fear, and where the boundaries of self-sovereignty were really being violated and threatened. And so for me, it was quite a delicious time of profound introspection. And the hope for me during all of that time was that people learned to be able to listen to themselves, because they were so forced in, like physically forced in. And oftentimes, when I'm looking at something in the physical world, I say that's a reflection of what's needed in the internal world. So I loved it. And so for me, it was an amplification. How do you use scenarios and situations like that to come out on the other side of them better, more, greater, grander, higher version of yourself, as opposed to less? So that was my certainly my hope for people, and that's what I took out of it.
I would imagine as a intuition expert that that would be a playground for you to be able to kind of deduce the unknown. I mean, we're talking about something that, the Spanish flu, there's not that many people that were around when that happened. So this is very uncharted territory. And rarely is it an opportunity, not even an opportunity. I didn't mean to use that word. Rarely is it a scenario where the whole planet's dealing with it, because sometimes it's just this myopic one place or a couple continents, but it was all of us going
Hmm.
through it.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. And so when it's global like that, I look at that intuitively as an evolutionary impulse, right? It's happening to the entire planet. And so if the interesting thing for me to observe as an intuition expert is that our intuition comes online in really powerful ways when the external environment is perceived as dangerous or a threat. So, at the most fundamental level, our intuition is a survival mechanism. Is it safe? Is it not safe? Will this choice keep me alive, or will it kill me? At its basis, it's that.
yeah,
And at its most evolved, it's an evolutionary tool.
yeah.
It's a wisdom tool. So when something happens like that globally, I go, oh, this is a major evolutionary upgrade, because there's nowhere we can go in our environment where we are free from the perceived threat. And so our intuition starts to scan the environment at a heightened level. And so our intuition comes online in a really profound way. And it's the same with what's going on in the information age right now.
Mm.
It's the same thing. We're surrounded by so much data and information, right? A 24-minute news cycle. It used to be a 24-hour news cycle. And before that, it was a 24-day news cycle, right? It's just the gate is closing. But that expanded information is, again, doing the same thing for our intuition. How do we not only survive in this expanded information age, but how do we thrive? Well, in order for us to do that, to cut through all the noise, our intuition has to come online in a big way. So there's all of these evolutionary impulses that are happening that are blowing our intuition wide open.
So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do for a living as a as a visioneer, intuitive expert, and entrepreneur. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day. One of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Such a good question. I teach people how to listen to their inside voice so they know what is correct and right and true for them so that they can make choices that are good for them and then good for the world. It's such a good question that you ask. How do you answer that? How do you speak to a child? Because if a child can understand it, then it's rooted in truth. I oftentimes, when I look at things that are very complex and complicated, I'm like, this can be so much simpler.
Yeah, yeah,
And so it's a
yeah,
great question.
yeah. Thank you. So I'm curious, what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
I wanted to be, well, at first I wanted to be a doctor, and then I wanted to be a vet. And then I wanted to be a wildlife artist. And ultimately, I became a wildlife artist. Um,
Okay.
and that's where I became a globally collected artist. I wanted to be a doctor because I wanted to help people. But then I realized that listen, I'm not good at school.
Yeah,
I, I lasted 3 weeks in art school. I'm like, get me the heck out of here.
yeah.
So I wanted to be a wildlife artist and I became one. And I became one of the highest selling artists of my kind in the world using my intuition to get me there. So um, and then that was my entrepreneurial foray. And I started that, entrepreneurial vision when I was 9. But then the intuition was always really active in me. Uh, Sensitive kid. But let me just say that as children, we are all profoundly intuitive. Um, Children are feeling and sensing creatures. They're not thinking creatures. So that's why when you ask a question, how would I explain this to a third grader? You do it simply because they're not thinkers, they're feelers, they're
Mm.
sensors. And so we're all hardwired truly for this intuitive intelligence as young kids. It's trained out of us.
Yeah.
It's conditioned out of us.
Uh-huh. All the walls go up and we start losing track of even the creativity and all of those things. As adults, we're just conditioned to just let it all go. And that's one of the
Yep.
biggest travesties, is to get rid of that curiosity and that gut instinct to go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even in simple benign ways, like let's say the child is feeling cold and or the mom or dad is feeling cold and the kid says, no, I'm not cold, and the parent will say, you are cold, put on your sweater. In that moment, you're diminishing what the child feels and knows is true for themselves. I'm not cold, I don't need a sweater. But in that moment, something is tweaked. And no, obviously, if your kid is standing outside in the middle of a snowstorm, you're going to put a coat on the kid.
Yeah.
But we want to be able to allow the children to really own what they're feeling, obviously within safety parameters and within reason. But that gets really profoundly coached out of us, which is sad. But that's why I'm here, to be able to reactivate it for people.
So how did you know? What was the moment? What was the time of your life? What was that realization that you had the intuition? When did that happen for you?
Well, it happened for me when I was young. My father died of cancer when I had just turned 7. And he was sick and dying in the hospital. And the first time I really sort of recalled that perhaps saw things differently was uh, during a visit to my dad in the hospital, and he was hooked up to all the machines and stuff. And I was standing in the corner of his room, and I was afraid to approach him because I could see through him. His body was transparent, um, like I could see everything that was behind him, and so that scared me. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what's going on? Am I hallucinating? But to me, in retrospect, that was me being able to sense his life force leaving his body as he died. And then a couple of days later, I was asleep at night in my bed, and he showed up at the foot of my bed in this sort of glowing light. And he said, I'm here to say goodbye. I'm sorry. Be a good girl for your mom. If you need me, just call. And poof, he was gone. And so that when my mom came in the next morning to say, darling girl, daddy's gone to heaven, I said to her, well, mommy, I know, because I'm getting goose pimples as I tell this story. I know because daddy came to say goodbye. And she just kind of went, you know, patted me on the head sort of thing.
Yeah.
And okay. And then a new reality started. But then as I was growing up, because I could sense things profoundly and I didn't understand them, I started to stuff it, you know, really turned it down, really limited it, really denied it. And it, and it didn't come online again until my mid late 20s. And that's when I started to think one of two things is happening here. Either I'm losing my mind and I'm batshit crazy, or something else is happening. And I prefer to think the latter is true. And so let me figure out what it is.
Do you think that all people have that somewhere in them, the wherewithal or potential to get to that point where they can be intuitive and communicate with the other side and or see through and see things?
Sure. I mean, that aspect of it, being able to communicate with the other side and then sort of see things more energetically, that would be considered sort of the more heightened aspect of it. So intuition emerges in what I call four levels. So again, we talked about it earlier, and everybody I've ever talked to has had the first one, the basic one, gut instinct, right? And that was my foray into law enforcement when I started training cops how to do this. I said to them, how many of you guys and gals have been out on the street and have just felt in your gut that something inherently was right or wrong? And every hand in the room went up. And that's the same question I ask with the folks who interview me. You've had gut instinct, Joe,
Yeah.
as a musician, as an interviewer, as a parent, if you are one. You have gut instinct. And so everybody puts the hand up and says, oh yeah, I've had that. So gut instinct is that survival basic instinct, if you want to call it. It's survival. And then it moves sort of up in our biology. It moves to the heart. Heart intuition is knowing how to communicate, knowing what to say, knowing how to have a heart to heart with somebody so you have a meaningful conversation that leaves people greater than they were when they entered that conversation. That's the intuition of the heart. Then there's the intuition of the brain. That's sort of the visionary aspect, being able to things see things clearly or see things differently. To be able to, like when I'm working with law enforcement, if I'm looking for a missing kid, I see where the kid is. I see pictures in my head. And that's how I'm able to give the police information. And then the larger intuition is the universal intelligence, the thing that links us to everything. That would be sort of more of that idea of being able to see people who have what I don't call it death, I call it they've unzipped their skin suit. This is a skin suit. This is a vehicle. When you die, all you do is unzip the vehicle, but the consciousness is still there. And so there are these different levels that naturally we're sort of doing the first two, heart and gut, and you can develop the former two, the head and the universal, to get those sort of more expanded perspectives. But we've all got it. That's why I
Yeah.
call it first intelligence, because it's an intelligence that we all have before we know anything. It's just learning, it's just remembering how to speak the language, not learning it, because it's already wired.
Fascinating. So let me ask you this. Who's been an inspiration or a hero for you in your life?
Hmm. Golly, I've got a lot of them. Albert Einstein, love him.
Yeah.
He was a profound proponent of intuition. He got all of his greatest ideas intuiting, not trying to grind it out in the lab or the studio. Steve Jobs, also a profound intuitor. Um, Michelangelo, another, and Leonardo da Vinci being my artist gurus. Uh, and then the spiritual intuitionists, the mavericks of intuition, Lao Tzu and um, Marcus Aurelius and
Yeah.
Jesus the Christ. There's all of these profound people who've been telling us about listening to that inner voice forever.
Yeah.
And it just sort of gets distorted through, religion and all those other things. But
Yeah.
I'd I'd say I've got a good list there. And
Yeah, you
Helen
do.
Keller.
Oh
Helen
yeah.
Keller's too is another one, right? She had no access to sense, couldn't hear, couldn't see, couldn't speak. So the senses, she was inside all the time. And so her profound intuition, her profound insight was off the charts because she had no access to sensory perception. The only perception she had access to was her inner world, her inner voice, her inner wisdom. And if you've ever read anything by her, it's just off the charts intuitive. Brilliant, brilliant woman.
I saw a pianist just recently, about 2, 3 weeks ago. His name is Matthew Whitaker, and he's blind.
Mm,
And it's one of the very few times that I've ever seen a genius player. He's a young prodigy. He almost channels that vibe of Stevie Wonder. But the way that he was marshaling that crowd and the way that he was, just yelping and getting into it and feeling it and smiling, his like whole essence of light and good was so impenetrable. The music was amazing, and I'm a jazz guy, I loved it. But the fact that nothing's going to penetrate that. And I kept thinking that, a lot of what he senses and feels is because he all of his other senses have been heightened because he can't see.
mhm.
Like he could turn around and sense the audience and face it and see what was going on. And there was just a genuine sense of himself that was heightened above a regular human. And it was so unreal. And it's like you're saying about Helen Keller. Like,
Yeah.
once you have to abate for something you don't have, it just heightens the other ones if you're
Yes.
really, trying to get to another place and trying to evolve as a human.
Absolutely. And so, if you're limited in your five senses, then your sixth sense has got to come on to compensate for that. And again, I prefer to think of our intuition not as our sixth sense, but as our first one. Um, that and that too is what we have to be able to do in order to access that intuitive power. Again, not only to survive, but able to thrive at these elevated levels. So, in you speaking of, was his name Matthew, the musician, the
Matthew
pianist?
Whitaker, yeah.
When you were speaking of Matthew, again, too, he's out of his mind, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way.
Sure.
He's like you said, you used a really important word. You used the word channeling, and channeling can kind of be perceived as woo woo, and I try to knock the fluff off of any of those sorts of things. But what he's doing in that context is his thinking mind is so out of the way that something else is moving. And that's when when you hear a performance and you get goose pimples, or you hear somebody say something, or you hear a singer and your body buzzes because your resonant field, your intuitive field is recognizing that heightened vibration, and then you feel it and perceive it that way. And this is why we get goose pimples. So here's a little bit of science for you, because I speak the science and the spirit of intuition. So here's some science behind why we get goose pimples. So when we're being formed in our mama's womb and the baby is being formed, there's a group of cells that form the nervous system, and it's called the neural crest. And part of those cells go to form the spinal cord, all of the nerves, the nervous system. And then it splits into two. So part of it goes to form the nervous system, and then the rest of it goes to form the skin. So we are actually literally covered with brain and nervous system. So our skin is 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 the brain that covers our body. So when we're in the energetic field and say you're listening to somebody like Matthew play and you're getting goose pimples, or you hear somebody say something and you're getting goose pimples, and then that goose pimples make you cry or make you laugh, or the whole body is responding to the information in the field. And so the skin becomes a physical response to information, and it can be beneficial information where you get goose pimples and you feel good about it. Or if you've ever met somebody who might be dangerous, or somebody who's creepy, or somebody who's just distorted in a way, and the skin on the back of your neck stands up because you're like, oh, I got to get away from this person and fast. That's the same thing. That's your skin responding to energy and information in the field and giving you intuitive information through the hair and the capillaries and everything. So if you've ever had your skin stand up, that's
Yeah.
an intuitive response.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So, speaking of fascinating, if you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating, who would that be? Who would you love to spend some time with?
Richard Branson.
Yeah.
And not and just to hang out with him, like not to talk about business. He's also one who's constantly talking about intuition. Um, Richard Branson, he's figured some things out and seeing the arc of his trajectory, selling stuff, selling magazines out of the back of his car when he was a kid. It's like, okay, that's the entrepreneurial spirit. He had to know that there was value there.
Yeah.
And then seeing how he now sort of leaves the business to the team that he's built, and now he likes to create these communities of visioneers and expanded thinkers. I think I'd like to meet him.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a good one.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. What is the motivation for you every day to do the work that you do, but to also evolve as a human being? What is that ultimate drive for you every day?
Well, the drive for me, I'll start with me, was to try to figure out who I was.
Yeah.
Like, clearly, I can't be the only person on the planet who has this skill set. So help me understand me. And so daily, I'm working on that, And I ask my intuition, show me who I really am. Show me who I really am. I'm not my conditions. I'm not my past. I'm not my history. But show me who I truly am. So that's always my goal for myself. And then to be able to help people, my gift is helping people figure out who they are,
Yeah.
to get in touch with that, because so many of us are under the illusion that the skin suit and our history and our past trauma and all of that other stuff is who we are, and we're not that. We're so much bigger, we're so much greater. And so my service to the world, and talking to folks like you, um, and training people how to do this, is to be able to give people access to that inner power. you know what do they say? You can teach a man to fish. No, you can give a man a fish, or you can teach a man to fish.
Yeah.
I don't like telling people what to do. I like helping people discover how to listen to themselves,
Hmm.
and then they get to tell themselves what to do, but they can trust it, that it's an evolved, it's a truth that's going to get them really where they want to go. So it's all about, my motto as a business person is remember who you are. And so I like to help people remember who they are.
Of all of these clients that you've helped and you've been around, what is one of the best breakthrough, one of the best success stories you've been involved with?
Ooh, it's a recent one, and it's rooted in business. A client had read my book, First Intelligence, and had heard me speak on something. And he was an entrepreneur, and he was doing pretty well in business. He about $40 million. His business was worth about 40 million. And he contacted me and he said, Simone, I want to be able to take my business to 1 billion. And I think he thought I would laugh at him. He kind of threw it out there like, you're going to tell me it can't be done. I'm like, okay, sure. Let's see what can be done. And so we worked together over the course of 3 years, and we took him from 40 million to 200 million in 3 years. 40, yeah, it was a 5 times over 3 years. And that for me, and what I do with my clients is I coach them and I say, now go out into the world and do it. I'm not going to babysit you. Here's what you do. Now go. And he would come back to me and give me little upticks. And then, after we'd been working for a while, I said, so where are we at? And he said, we're at 200 million. And he said, 1 billion is inevitable. I said, yeah. And so being able to hear that out of somebody who's starting at 40 and their target is 1 billion, and they're generating this trajectory. At first, it starts slow, but then it becomes exponential.
Hmm.
And so when I heard him say 1 billion is inevitable, I thought, yeah. So for me as a coach, it's like training an athlete to get ready to go to the Olympics.
Yeah.
And when they come and they say to me, I want a gold medal in the Olympics, I say, okay, let's organize that. And then one day they say, it's inevitable. It's a done deal. It's done. That for me, again, goose pimples. So that for me, that happened in the last year that we got that kind of result back. So, and then being able to work with the cops, that's also profoundly rewarding, to be able to bring information that they can then use to bring kids home and things like that, and being able to see the light go on in these police officers' head, who tend to be just the facts, ma'am, and they're very shut down. And you start to see the light go on, and they're like, oh my gosh, I had this idea and this insight, and it led me to this, and it led me to this, and we brought the kid home. And I was like, yay, I've done my job well. And oftentimes those police officers are cynical.
Yeah.
They're like, what are you going to teach us, you little chippy?
Yeah.
Right. And I said, just, you guys have all had the gut instinct. Let's see where we can take it. And then for them to be like open to that and see the light come on is really quite spectacular for me. So that's always rewarding.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I'm a work in progress. And I know less and less every day because what's revealing itself is so much greater than I can even comprehend. So I'm willing to say I'm becoming less and less knowledge based, and I'm willing to let information flow. I'm willing to know nothing. The more I know, the less I want to know. You know,
Well
so work
said.
in progress every day.
So let me ask you this. We've come out of this pandemic, we've gone through something. You know, I'm curious, do you feel like we're entering an age of enlightenment, whether it's emotional, intellectual, or spiritual? Do you feel like we're in a realm that's a little different than before, or what's your sense on what's going on the planet?
Absolutely. How can we, because there's only one of us here. How can we as a being go through something like that and not come out of it changed? Now, some people will come out of it reduced,
Yeah,
and other people will come out of it expanded. But if there are, it only requires it requires only a small group of people to come out expanded to be able to then influence the group that came out reduced. Um, I'm excited about what's going on right now, and not in a Pollyanna kind of way.
yeah,
I, I'm excited about what's going on right now because when you look at how a structure evolves, it evolves when there's a massive change in the environment. Again, what a structure might perceive as a threat. That's the only way things evolve. And so these things that we're looking out in the 3D world and perceiving them as threats, there's a higher intelligence. The first intelligence is navigating us through that and up leveling us every single time. So I'm like, cool, we're becoming sort of X-Men, you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
superpowers are coming online and we're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it with this new breed of children who are showing up on the scene. Matthew, the young musician you spoke of, being one of them. We would call them neurodivergent,
yeah,
but there's something else at work there. Different ways of processing information, different ways of perceiving the world, different ways of accessing genius. So that to me is really exciting. The old guard, the old guard is dead. The new guard, the new evolution is coming online in a big way. It's not even coming online, it's here. And
yeah,
so how do we surf that with no map? How do we surf that with nobody ahead of us showing us the way? Our intuition says, trust me, go here.
yeah,
And those, to be intuitive in this world requires bravery. I say living an intuitive life is not for sissies. So you have to put your big kid pants on and trust what you know to be correct and true for you, and trust that other people are following that same inner wisdom, and we'll find our way to the light for
yeah,
sure.
for sure. So if anyone wants to get your book, they want to hire you, reach out, learn more about you, any of the good business, where can they go?
SimoneWright.com. That's www.simonewright.com. My book, First Intelligence, is there on the website. You can connect with me for coaching and one-on-one stuff. And I've got master classes and things that are designed for entrepreneurs or just basic things. And it people people tend to appreciate my pragmatic, fluff-free approach to this stuff because it can be kind of woo-woo. But if you understand that it's really inherent in your nature to be this brilliant, to access this level of genius, then you're not afraid to use it. And that's what I help people do. So that's my great joy.
I love it. Simone, this has been wonderful. Thank you. It's great to meet you. Thank you for your story, and keep doing the wonderful work, as I know you will.
Thank you, Joe. You too. Great to
Thank
meet you, and keep up doing your work too.
Absolutely. Thank
Bye.
you. Take care. See you
Bye,
later.
everyone.